And so for now, I think we will want to bring back the panel members to be able to answer questions. Msonda, come up here, please. Bridget, and please prepare your question, because we have 15 minutes to really engage with the issues that have come up. Very interesting subjects. Time is short, but then we still have to address this in the way that we should. So may I ask who has the first question, burning one? Okay, it's a question. Do we have volunteers to help us, please, with the microphones? Thank you. Yes, we'll start with you from Zimbabwe. Yeah?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Pam. I just want to touch on the issue of professionalization. What I am hearing, it's like there are no courses that actually, at high level, that do teach on supply chain management. But if you look all over the universities, Lugano, Cranfield, Glamorgan, all of them have these masters in whether it's international logistics, global supply chain management and all. So now I'm thinking, should the question be the issue of maybe trying to get other universities to come up with such courses? Or what we should actually be asking is the kind of people that we are actually recruiting to conduct this supply chain management function. How well qualified are they? Because what I'm finding, or what you do find traditionally if you go around most of the organizations, is that traditionally the people who've been involved, whether it's logistics, supply chain management, is maybe an accountant hasn't done well, somebody in programs, their post is being abolished, so they're now told, okay, fine, now you go to logistics and you work there, and they really don't have the clue. But if you look even at industry, DHL, UPS and all, most of the guys that they're actually employing there do have these qualifications. So it becomes very difficult for somebody who doesn't have the qualification to actually sit at the table with the doctors and be able to plan and speak at the same level. So should the question really be that we are now trying to reinvent the wheel, or we're saying the people that we are actually getting to do this work, are they the right people in the first place? Thank you.
Very important question, and I'll also encourage people sitting on the other side to feel free to respond to this, but let's pack it up first. Let's go to the second question. There was a hand up there before you, so let's take that first.
Mine is burning, but I hope it's okay. Just a question. Thanks, Dr. Umar, for the presentation. So the presentation on Nigeria. There are two things that I wanted to raise. One is we're talking about merging supply chains, and you presented a very exciting strategy for the immunization program. I wanted to know if there are any thoughts about, integrating other health supply chains with this. And then the second piece is about professionalization. We're talking about training, and Nigeria is a very rich country in terms of academic institutions. For one, I was trained in Nigeria. I studied pharmacy in Nigeria, and I know that pharmacy school in Nigeria, when I went to school, did not have supply chain in the curriculum. So I don't know if this is something also that you're considering in the country. I know this may not be specific to the public health program, but is it something that has been discussed with some of the stakeholders to see how the academia can be brought into this? Thank you.
Very good. Second question. Third question here.
Just maybe a question also is whether we focus primarily about the supply chain, or also trying to see how the supply chain link with the needs of the country itself at global level, at national level, or at the dispensing points, whether it's at the hospital, and this liaison between the needs and the procurement element there. And I think that also may have an impact on the profile of people of supply chain chain managers, whether you want them to ensure the supply of products or also have them involve and support in helping to select and the drafting procurement processes, as well as helping at local level the use of the products and the ordering of the products as such.
I picked the key word on the needs-based training. Is the training really relevant? Is it the right training for whoever is being trained? Okay, so we stop there with those three first. Let's get the panel to respond to that, and we start from Rebecca, please.
Yeah, so on the question of whether or not the education programs already exist, I don't know if we are training people to do one thing and then retraining them to do something else. I mean, if you're waiting till the master's degree level, that's usually, mid-level career. So how do people go into the entry-level positions? What kind of degrees, would there be a bachelor's degree in logistics that might be available through a business school and not necessarily a health sciences school? So I think we really need to look at education in terms of also what are the career pathways. Again, are we training them in the right things to meet the needs of the supply chain system? So that's one thing to look at. And then are we recruiting the right people into the system? And again, that depends on how you write up your job descriptions when you're filling a post. I mean, if you require someone to have a pharmacy degree in order to run a central medical store, then you're going to get pharmacists applying and not logisticians. And I know that happens in some countries. Thanks.
Thank you.
So I just want to echo that a little bit, that in terms of professionalization, as I mentioned, even in developed countries, there's the issue of the training programs exist, but it's not enough people going through them. And it's because at an early age, they're not being presented with logistics and supply chain as an interesting, exciting, thrilling, really, career field to get into. So even though they exist, it still can be hard to find the right people because not enough people are going through those programs. And then on the third question regarding how supply chain links up with the needs of the country, the needs of the community it serves. Yeah, that was one of the interesting things that came out of the case studies is the organizations learn that when they talk about stakeholders and the skills they need, the more broadly they looked at who their stakeholders really were, the more successful they were in finding people who really fit the needs of the supply chain. So I think it is a good point that when you're thinking about the skills you need and what your supply chain does, it's not enough to think about your supply chain moving material from point A to point B. It's what is the context it operates in, what are the objectives you're trying to achieve, and what are the expectations of the people who manage the supply chain, who fund the supply chain, who use the supply chain.
Great. Okay, 2 minutes each, and if it's been said, then we move on, so just to be able to focus it to the question.
Okay, the second question is on whether this we have integration in mind. Yes, if you look at the name of the department, it's Department of Logistics and Medical and Health Commodities, yes. In fact, at the thinking level, we are thinking of convergence at one point because the immunization system has a strong and more sustainable system of supply. However, that can be relied upon by other departments or disease control systems, like the TB can use that system also for their supply, malaria, HIV, but the differences has to be understood clearly. This is require cold chain, others just dry stores. So the convergence areas can be defined, such as the use of the dry stores to keep some of the other health commodities, the transportation system. You can use also the platform for training. The data management system can be integrated. However, I think the new word we learn here is the convergence, and that is what we are looking at in the long run. Then on the issue of training, yes, In Nigeria, we have polytechnics that provide a diploma in purchasing and supply management. We also have an institute of supply chain management, where already if you graduate or if you want to convert, you participate in training over a long period, 2 years, 3 years, and you become a member initially, then later a chartered member of the institute. We also, in terms of procurement, we also, there is a work by the Bureau of Public Procurement to provide short training, quick training for weeks at regular interval for those cadre in order to catch up before a formal arrangement is made for discussing with the academic institute, whereby curriculum and other cadre can be aligned so that professionally people can be trained from day one to be supply chain managers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Uma. Yes, Indonesia?
Thank you. Actually, in Indonesia, there's no or minimal information or subject regarding the supply chain management in curricula of pharmacy degree. And the other problem that lack of competence standardization of SCM personnel, and therefore in 3 years strategy of supply chain management, actually we just developed strategy, 3-year strategy of supply chain management, and there was 2 important aspects that we have to work with. The first one is establish or standardize the competence of supply chain management personnel, and the second one, we try to advocate the some university, especially the pharmacy faculty, to put the supply chain management as a subject or in the curricula of a pharmacy degree. And the strength one that we have, since 2009, we have such kind of government regulation that regulate that personnel or supply chain management personnel should be pharmacists or technician pharmacy, under supervised of pharmacy. So we have to put in this aspect to the curricula of the pharmacist degree.
Thank you very much. Anything to add? Anything different? Yeah?
So I just quickly want to respond. One other perspective on the first question about professionalization is thinking about it in terms of supply and demand. We all here recognize how important logistics, training, and skills are for for public health supply chains. However, the PTD exists because public health sectors don't necessarily recognize that across the board, and so we're here to advocate just to develop that demand in those public health sectors. And the public health sectors, the countries where that demand has already been generated and they are recognizing and looking for it, have a supply problem. Taylor pointed out earlier that the private sector, where not only is there really clear recognition of the importance of supply chain, the need for these skilled professionals, they're having trouble finding adequate supply, and they've got a lot of resources. So as long as the private sector can't even fill their demand, the public sector can't compete for those people. And so that's a real challenge in getting them into the position. So I absolutely hear your point and the challenge, but I think that that's the reason why we need to continue to invest in education, is so that we've got enough supply available that we can compete with the private sector. And just in terms of the linkage with selection and procurement, I think that's another really important point to focus on. And I think the answer is just, we need to keep in mind, when we talk about supply chains, we're talking about systems, and they start before the products are shipped to the central medical store, the first point of entry in a country. That's logistics. That's a huge component of supply chain, but that is not the same thing as an entire supply system. And our approaches are only going to be effective and sustainable if we're taking that broader view.
Thank you very much, Bridget.
And I think that Musunda's going to say something about convergence.
I'll comment briefly also on the professionalization point, because the courses are available, but it's an issue of access. The courses, particular courses you mentioned, are not accessible to everyone who might be demanding them. So it's about making these courses available locally where there is a demand, and where there is no demand, which Bridget alluded to, because not all the pharmacists recognize that they need this training. It's about integrating it into curricula, so it is part of is mainstreamed within the curricula. On the convergence issue, it's just to echo Dr. Omar's comments, really, because the Gavi strategy is also speaking not of integration but of convergence where it makes sense. So it makes sense to integrate or to converge supply chain activities, then do so. But yeah.
Thanks very much. I mean, before moving into public health supply chain, I was in the humanitarian sector where we worked on developing humanitarian logistics and professionalization. And for that matter, I want to just bring in Dorothea. I know George Fenton is going to present somewhere, right? Dorothea is here, George Fenton is here. Could you just, within the context of this presentation today, could George, who is the chair for the Humanitarian Logistics Association, say something? And Dorothea, start with you, Dorothea, on, within the context of this discussion, what is it that we did that they can learn from?
Well, I particularly wanted to respond to the first question about universities, because I think there is often an overemphasis on university degrees in supply chain, and we're talking about competencies. And actually, they are competence-based vocational professional qualifications, which also can help develop professionals within the supply chain. And certainly, to go on to Pamela's second point, working across with the Fritz Institute in the United States, my professional association worked on developing competence-based qualifications for people, including people working in the health supply chain. So I think there's a real role for the universities, but we shouldn't forget the support staff and the route in, because we, like Taylor in the UK, we have a huge problem encouraging young people in from the school sector. And we've got free resources on our website that people can look at, including a game which has been developed, an app by University of Hull, to try to get children interested in supply chains and supply chain management. So there are alternatives to just high-level qualifications, and that partially addresses the access, but not totally.
George?
Thank you. Yes, I would echo what Dorothea has just said in terms of the importance of recognizing vocational access to training and experiential learning. I think it also would be good to address the issue of demand that was raised, because one of the challenges that we faced in the humanitarian sector was getting our organizations to recognize, similar to what was mentioned in terms of getting public health departments to recognize the value of logistics. It's a critical aspect of humanitarianism, and without adequate logistics support and supply chains being managed, we can't respond to emergencies, essentially, is what we're talking about in the humanitarian sector, and it's very much overlaps with the issues faced by the public health sector. So I think there's a lot of synergy there. But we've made some success over the last 10 years in addressing this issue of demand. So there is now more of a pull for learning in logistics and supply chain.
Thank you, George. That addresses the first three questions. Can we take three more, which will be the final one? So it's got to be really, really hot, yeah? Pierre, your hand was up first. I'm coming to you.
maybe also sort of an observation, but well, this thing about the demand is there's an issue also on the examples there are, and the donor agencies are very powerful. People looking at them, right? But if you look at the Global Fund LFA, like the UN, including UNICEF, the USAID, these organizations, when they recruit people for supply chain work, they write primarily public health and pharmacists. You can't do LFA work on the technical side without being a pharmacist. They do not require supply chain knowledge. It's not recognized as anything. The same goes for UN system. Primary public health pharmacist is not a qualification to have a degree. I know that the winds are changing, but it's been like that for years. So, and it means that also on the donor side, they don't see these people there. So if you want to go to the top of these organizations, you should be a doctor or you should have a master of public health. You will not go there with a master of supply chain.
I think that's point taken. And you're talking of how do we get the right people in the right positions. Now, there are courses on certification in humanitarian logistics. If I ask any organization today whether the people they are now bringing in as the others retire are people with that qualification, you'll find that that is not happening. So people are being trained on the right curriculum, but they are not being given the space to come in and do the job. The wrong people are being brought in. So we move on to the next question. Yes?
Bashir from Sudan, Central Medical Supply. I'm very happy because my organization has been discussed here in assessment. I did 3 assessments or gap analysis in my organization. And this has been done by Leeds and HERA and these organizations, the gap is we get from these 3 organizations. We found that the leadership is the main devoid of my staff. That whatever the conclusion or number 1 conclusion or the result of this assessment is everything is going good, doing better, but still yet there is a gap in leadership because the people are not yet in a place to take decision far away. And in my organization system now it is a unified system, including all the supply chain in Sudan, all the supply chain. So we don't deal mainly with pharmacists. We deal with storekeeper, we deal with assistant pharmacists, we deal with doctors, we deal with a lot of players. And now I'm just, I think I have opened a channel with you regarding this because you care a lot for stock out, and stock out is coming, also could be treated by leadership style. If a man has a good leadership style, he will not allow his service delivery or to be stocked out. So we are in need of organization which can help us to make leadership courses in my organization and also risk management. Okay. These are 2 cases I face in my organization.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So the third question, who was that? You? Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Eric Mallard from the World Bank. Actually, I have 1 comment and 1 question, so I will be very quick. I wanted to react to what Bridget said about the fact that somehow in the public health sector we cannot compete with the private sector on the supply chain talents. This may be true, but I really believe that this is really a big issue because I think we should work under the assumption that there is a resource-constrained environment. Health labor market is a dynamic market with forces, and therefore we should work really on the incentives. And I'm back to what Taylor presented on the fact that incentives are very important to make sure that we can attract top supply chain talents even in the public sector. So we should really be in a situation where the public health sector is able to compete with private sector companies. short question about leadership. I come from a multinational company. In these multinational companies, leadership development takes time. It takes energy. You will have a mentor to develop your leadership skills. You will have a curriculum within the company to do so. So I was wondering whether you have thought about contacting the Pfizer, BP, Microsoft of this world, really to get inputs on how best to learn from their experience when they have to develop this leadership within their companies.
Thank you, Eric. Dr. Mustafa, you wanted to say something here.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. I want to understand more. I'm here now saddled with trying to get the new department going in my country. And I've had several conversations here about getting the right people in the first place. But then there is a restriction because in terms of getting the job description advertised and getting the right people to come in, it says you must have maybe a university degree or HND as the minimum qualification. You do not offer a university degree in logistics also to specifically state that this is the person that is going to come in. So I'll still end up, maybe at the end of the day, even with the department, having the wrong people in. Okay. I was also maybe a wrong person in the first place. Then the second thing, thinking over all this, is that you are trying to promote outsourcing. And outsourcing is just all about the third-party logistics. I had even fourth-party logistics this time around coming up on board. And you are a public health sector that is already, how do I say, looking for resources that is not available, and you're trying to develop and professionalize a system within which you can keep these resources and return them. But yet the program is all moving towards another direction that is pulling it completely, that will wipe away all the resources you have, because the private sector at any point in time will always pay better than the public sector. And the incentives are better always in the private sector than in the public sector. I mean, that's what I've learned in life. So isn't there irony here? How do you manage this situation?
Great.
I'm confused.
Well, because those people have not passed here to go and eat our food, we can still spend time here to discuss the important things. This will be food for thought. We learned yesterday from Brigitte, so any reactions to that or from the floor? But we start from this side first. Any reactions to the things that have been pointed out?
To the point about creating demand.
Speaker.
Oh, okay. To the point about creating demand, and you mentioned the UN organization, I totally agree with you. A lot of my effort is spent trying to get buy-in internally. But your last phrase was that the winds are changing, and that they're definitely changing. A lot more focus is being placed on that, and supply chain is being recognized as a key component, as a key enabler for the programs. On the Eric's point to the private sector, under the Gavi strategy, we're working with UPS on the leadership initiative, and there is a private sector working group that is looking at exactly what you mentioned in terms of how can we leverage the private sector. It's across the strategy, but one of the things it is looking at is how we can leverage the private sector for this leadership initiative.
Great. Yes, Dr. Oper?
This issue of having the cadre for supply chain is a very serious issue, but I will use an example of what we do in the issue of the procurement cadre in Nigeria. When the issue of procurement become an issue and that we need to have the cadre and has been approved by government, what the Bureau of Public Procurement did is to develop curriculum for conversion. So if you are an engineer, a pharmacist, a public health, or whatever your pre-degree or their degree course you have, and you have interest in joining the cadre, you attend what you call conversion courses over a long period of time. And you will be certified. And when you sit for an exam, when you pass the exam, you will be certified. And over the years, you come back for refresher training for to be a fellow up to so member, then fellow. So the Institute of Supply Purchasing and Supply Management of Nigeria is saddled with that responsibility, because they are an institute recognized by government and can certify you. And then they also certify procurement auditors. So without that certificate, you cannot be called a procurement personnel, and so you cannot join the cadre. So you may have any degree, but if it's their interest, then you now attend that course. So I can see that if as a short-time strategy, if we will have something similar, a conversion training, whereby these pharmacy assistants, these pharmacists, medical doctors. I'm a medical doctor initially. I'm also a public health expert, but I attend conversion to be a procurement officer for health sector good at the World Bank Institute. So from there, I've also attended courses by IDA, and then also the Crown Agent will also have training in Nigeria using the new law. So I was actually converted from a streamlined medical doctor, a professional public health expert. Now I'm a procurement person by attending these several courses over time. I think if this is done, it may help at the short term and the long term, a curriculum and institutes now providing free secondary school training in logistics so that you start from day one and professionalize. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Brigitte, last one.
Yeah, so I just want to respond to all of those comments with some messages of hope, and sometimes I can be a little idealistic, but I think, I think Eric pointed out there and Pierre pointed out there's the winds of change afoot. Within the donor agencies and the international organizations, there is growing acknowledgement and recognition and resources to supply chain. Will the entire global health programs of these ever be run by a logistician? I don't know. There's a lot of other focus, but our position is changing, and Masunda and I are examples of that as individuals who are hired to focus on those issues. That's allocation of resources. Am I on a path to take over the USAID Global Health Bureau? I hope not. But I think that there's also room within those clinical cadres as well for more recognition and understanding of the importance of this. I mean, FIP has become engaged with people that deliver because the pharmacists do recognize that. At the Global Health Workforce Alliance in Brazil, the head of the the International Confederation of Nurses stood up and said, "We can't do our job without you guys. We need you to help us get there." So we're getting there. We're not there yet, and there's still a lot of challenges. In terms of competing with the private sector, I think, Eric, your message was really helpful as well. There is opportunity to become more competitive, and incentives have really been shown. We need to continue to galvanize resources for that, and potentially even for outsourcing, using similar kinds of resource mobilization. And the World Bank has done a great job with their performance-based financing initiatives around that. USAID is following that lead, and we're encouraged by a recent success with that in Mozambique. So I think we're getting there. And even Sudan's example about how starting to recognize the leadership gap and institutionalizing that. And with our work, we are looking to the private sector. I'm happy to talk more offline with anyone about the leadership initiative and how we're linking case studies and mentors from the private sector to the supply chain leaders in the countries where we're focusing.
Thank you very much, Brigitte. That was very important to hear that from a donor, USAID as a key donor, to close that session. And all I can say, yes, leaning on your word of the wind of change is blowing. We are moving away from the silo system, from the fragmented supply chain, from the narrowly focused of warehouse or supply chain, of procurement, of distribution. We are looking at a holistic, systematic, structured supply chain end-to-end approach. And if we haven't got that, then we'll be left behind. So on that note, food for the thought, let's go and digest that as we eat the food for the soul. Thank you all very much for your time.
Just the logistics for lunch. If you go up the stairs and to the left, you find the cafeteria. You didn't have to pay anything for the conference, but you do have to buy your own lunch. And the way that works is you pick up a tray, plate, and your cutlery, and it pays by weight. So you choose your food, and then they weigh your plate. Just a reminder that